verse and who lived that out was a woman by the name of Charlotte Diggs Moon. Better known to most of us in this room, or at least some of us, is Lottie. Lottie was a Southern Baptist missionary who, for 39 years, served in China. And what an amazing story she had. She actually started her work in China. And by the way, I'm taking a little detour today from the book of Jude. Lord willing, come back next Sunday, finish that. But I want to do a biographical sermon this morning on this woman, Charlotte Diggs Moon. I want us to, for some of us, to be reacquainted with her. And for those that say, I have no idea who Charlotte Diggs Moon is, I want you to know this woman when you leave here today. And more than know her, I hope you will embrace all the faith and hope and trust in Jesus that she embraced. But she started her missionary career in China about 14 years before this church was founded. In 1873, she started in China, and about 14 years later, Dr. I.G. Woolsey, the founding pastor of this church, Woolsey Baptist Church, was established. And Lottie wrote letters. She wrote a lot of letters. And perhaps one of those letters was even to Dr. Woolsey, the founding pastor. I'd like to tell her story, but maybe better than me telling her story, what if we could just kind of step back in time and let Lottie tell her own story. So even as you think about this, just know that, as I said, Lottie was so good at letters, and she wrote letters back home. She wrote to what was then called the Foreign Mission Board. She wrote to pastors. She wrote to friends back home in Virginia. And while I have no record that she ever wrote a letter to I.G. Woolsey, maybe she did, because she had a great burden to get the gospel to the nations, and particularly the nation, the place where she was serving for those years in China. Again, her letters, she was a feisty woman, and she did not mind speaking up. So again, if we can just think about this for a few moments. By the way, parents, if you want to come with your children, don't send your children down here by themselves. But if you'll come, if a mom or dad wants to come and sit on the floor, as Lottie comes, they may want to sit up close. So we're going to turn the lights back up in just a moment as Lottie makes her way out. But again, let's just step back, as it were, in time and hear firsthand from Lottie as she comes and shares with us this morning. Good morning. Welcome.
My goodness, do I have a lot to do today. I have a letter I've been writing, and I need to proof it. I need to be sure this is what I want to say. Let's see. And I have the address. Reverend Isaac G. Woolsey, Woolsey Baptist Church, Woolsey, Georgia. And I just put September 1911 for the date because I didn't know how many days it would take me to write it. So I'm going to go through it and be sure this is what I want to say. And so I can get this in the post office today. In China, I guess we would say, we'll post it. And I addressed it to Reverend Woolsey. I'll just tell you what I've told him. My name is Charlotte Diggs Moon. Most people call me Miss Lottie. I'm writing to you to share some information about myself and the work in Southern Baptist missions in North China. That's the Shantung province in North China. I had hoped that you might inform your congregation of our great need for missionaries in North China. Of course, we always need money too, and I'm constantly writing letters like this one to you, sir. I was born on December 12th, 1840 in Albemarle County, Virginia, near Charlottesville. My parents, Edward Harris Moon and Anna Maria Moon, owned a 1,500-acre plantation. There were 7 of us children, and I was in the middle. Having been educated herself, Mama saw to it that all of her children got the best education that she and Papa could afford. And contrary to Southern custom, each one of us was encouraged to pursue our own course of study and to learn all that we could. At the age of 14, I entered the Virginia Female Seminary. That's an equivalent of a secondary school. I was quite mischievous, a tomboy, and I liked playing with boys more than girls. My April Fool's prank one year was climbing up into the belfry tower with the sheets to tie all the bells down so that they would not ring the next morning to start school. That was not the only time I was reprimanded at school. In 1857, I was a student at the Albemarle Female Institute in Charlottesville. Some Baptist men had started this school for young ladies so that the young ladies could get a college degree the same as the men at the University of Virginia. So I loved foreign languages. I loved studying French and Greek and Hebrew. And I became a proficient writer. Of course, we had religion classes. We did have religion classes, of course, and many other classes. But my mother was very distressed that I did not care for the religion courses. She just was a devout Christian. And of course, I'd been taught at home and in church, and I knew what she believed, but I just hadn't got there yet. And so Mama always had Sunday school and worship service in our home when there wasn't a Baptist church close by that we could go to, or that we couldn't get there because of the weather. And my father was a Christian, and he was Presbyterian, though, and he was convinced that he should become Baptist also. So I am ashamed to say that I made light of religion. Well, I had not seen any reason for it up to that point. I didn't see that it applied to me, and I intended to remain in control of my life. A revival was being held in our school with Dr. John Broadus preaching. My friends had realized that I was a skeptic, and they were concerned for me. One day, that week of the revival, they asked me where I was during the meeting, and I said, well, I was in the haystack reading Shakespeare. Well, that made it worse. They were so concerned that they got up very early the next morning, and they had a special prayer meeting for me. Well, I decided I'd go just to see what was going on. I'd go to the meeting. And I really went to scoff. I went to scoff, but I came home to stay awake all night. I was forced to consider the condition of my soul. And I determined that I would give careful investigation, intelligent investigation, that I would search it out. And I did. As I said, I read the Bible and prayed all night. And I made a decision. On December the 21st, 1858, I made a profession of faith and was baptized in the Charlottesville Baptist Church. And whatever I did wholeheartedly. And that was the beginning of an exciting relationship with my Lord and Savior. Now, Reverend Woolsey, you probably know that Baptist preachers were giving a lot of attention to missions in their sermons around, say, 50 years ago. They were really pressing, especially the young men. They were always trying to get the young men to go to the mission field. But no one ever mentioned young ladies. Of course, unless it was to go with a husband. That's the only way they could go, with a husband. And I guess people at that time didn't believe God called women to missions. But I inwardly thought I would like to go to Japan. I was fascinated with Japan, and I thought I'd love to be a missionary there. But I was needed at home. I just finished college, and the war was about to start. And it did in 1861, the sad time, the war between the states. And since Papa had already passed away, Mama had to run the plantation by herself. And so I did not try to get a job at that time. I was going to teach, but the war was going on, and I stayed home, and we went and cared for the wounded at the hospital. My sister, my older sister, was a surgeon for the Confederacy. Now, I'd already received my master's in 1860, and then after the war, our family's funds had diminished greatly. So I applied for a teaching job at Danville, Kentucky, where I taught for 5 years in a girls' school. And there I met Anna Safford, my fellow teacher. She became a longtime friend. We became increasingly interested in missions because we were able to meet missionaries coming from China, coming back home from China, and got to talk with them. So at that time, the Foreign Mission Board did not extend the call to unmarried women at all. No, unmarried women. So I never had found it necessary to marry. And I certainly didn't want to stifle my creativity or get locked into a miserable relationship. So, but missions was in the back of my mind all along. But however, the way it turned out was that my baby sister, Eddie, was the first single woman to get an appointment to the mission field from Southern Baptist Foreign Mission Board. And that was in 1872. She'd been corresponding with a missionary in China who influenced the board to extend a call to her. And she went. In 1872, the Baptist Women of Virginia raised money and supported her. Well, in the summer of 1871, Anna Safford and I went to Cartersville, Georgia. We left Danville, Kentucky, and went to a girls' school to run this school in Cartersville. I have to keep checking this to be sure I've got all the right dates before I send it to this gentleman, Reverend Woolsey. But one Sunday morning in February of 1873, I walked down the aisle of the Cartersville First Baptist Church of Cartersville. That's where we were attending. Wherever we were, we went to church. But I walked down that aisle and made up my mind. I surrendered to go to China. Anna felt led to join a Presbyterian mission group in China. But her father was a Presbyterian minister. So we got to visit with each other for many years in China. We were not in the same area, but we corresponded and visited when we had the time. When I arrived in Tung Chau on October 25th, 1873, there were only 6 Southern Baptist missionaries in all of North China. My sister was one of them, and we were so excited to be reunited. She already knew the language well, and I learned quickly from the Chinese man who was my teacher. I was 33 years old when we went to live at the house at the little crossroads, that's what we called our home. My sister and I found a place where we could be together, and I'm still here. It was difficult to get used to being shunned. The Chinese people would have nothing to do with us. And they called me a foreign devil or devil old woman. That was hard for someone raised the way I was, that you were always polite and showed respect. And so that was difficult. The first job I had there in China was at the girls' school. I taught at the girls' school, but there were just very few girls, and the growth was so slow because the parents didn't trust us. It's very hard to get the trust of Chinese people for a foreigner. But when I arrived, immediately, I started corresponding with Dr. Henry A. Tupper he was the president of the Foreign Mission Board, who has been a wonderful friend to me and an advocate for women in missions. He told me one time that he had said in a speech, I estimate a single woman in China is worth 2 men married. So it shows you he believed in us. He believed that we could do a job if we were called to it. I always corresponded with him quite a bit because he was a good correspondent. He wrote me back, and I wanted to be sure that the board was informed so they could tell the new missionaries coming on that they needed to bring plenty of flannel undergarments because it's cold. It's very cold in North China in the winter, much more severe than in the United States at the same latitude. So I reminded all the newcomers that they needed flannel undergarments, and lots of them. And then, Reverend Woolsey, I want you to know about Miss Sally Holmes. Miss Sally was in charge. She was one of the missionaries who had been there longer. She was in charge of the country work. And one day she told me we were going to have a picnic. She's going to take me out in the country. And she had so much energy. She was an amazing lady. And she also had a donkey. And I liked him. I loved that donkey. But you know, he did not bite. He did not kick. He was a perfect gentleman. He did bray a lot. He was loud. But that's okay. We all have to, express ourselves. But I love that little donkey, and she would ride him right up front. When we'd go out through the country, she would lead the group. And she, on her donkey, we following behind. And I found that this was my love, being out in the country, because the people were different out there. They were more receptive. The ladies would speak to us. Of course, we could speak the language now, but this was my great love. Going out there to teach the women. That's what we did. We taught the women, and they would invite us into their homes, which was quite different from in town where we lived in Tung Chau. And but in fact, I don't think that the women of China could have been reached at all. They could not be reached unless we went to them, but because they were not free to go out into the public. They could go nowhere without their husbands. So that was quite different from what we were used to. But the culture shock was the main problem. We were stepping into a different culture, and we had to respect it, and we had to understand their way. So the ladies in the villages were much, much more friendly, and we got to go in their homes and work and teach. And they wanted to hear. This was grueling work, though, because there were just a few of us, and we went to many villages surrounding Tung Chau, sometimes for just one day, and sometimes we'd stay several days and then travel back to our home. But then a terrible thing happened, Eddie got sick, very sick. Emotionally and physically, she was worn out with terrible, terrible throat problems. She rested and was treated for several months, maybe 6 months. How many months? It was months, but we finally decided that I needed to go home with her. So I took her back to Virginia, and she did improve. But she could not return to China. In fact, she was always sickly after this. I was so anxious to get back. This was an unexpected furlough, and I was very anxious to get back to China. But when she was better and the ladies there in our area raised money so that I could return to China in 1877. And I determined then that I would not let myself get so exhausted that I could not do my work. I've seen many missionaries collapse under their loads because they wouldn't rest. They would not take the proper time for rest. And I knew that the Crawfords and the Hartwells and the Miss Sally Holmes were carrying on my work. They were carrying my load. They had plenty to do themselves. And so my advice always to newcomers was always take time to rest. And that has served me well for a long, long time. I believe that. And I had a lot of funny things that people thought were funny. I don't know that you will, Reverend Woolsey, but I put a wet towel over my head when I got heated or just the atmosphere was not right, and that just relieved me, and people laughed. And I got a bath every day because that made me feel so much better. And do you know, people thought that was strange. But just threw that in. I don't know whether he will appreciate it. But as you may know, I never married. Though in 1882, I was engaged to a wonderful man, Dr. Crawford Toy. He was president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary at that time. But when I first knew him, he was one of my professors in college, and all of his students just adored him. He had plans, though. He was going to teach at Harvard. He was leaving this position, going to Harvard. And I felt that God wanted me in China. So my conclusion was that God had first claim on my life. So, since our plans conflicted, I couldn't marry. So I went on, stayed in China. You know, I've written thousands of letters to family and friends, the Foreign Mission Board, Southern Baptist ladies and pastors and people in position of leadership, because I'm always begging for more missionaries. It's just, that's what we needed. Money so that we could have more missionaries. I wrote articles quarterly for the Foreign Mission Journal, but we were desperate in China. But the Foreign Mission Board was broke at this time. And because this is around 1887, Foreign Mission Board was broke then. And I had heard that the Southern Methodist ladies had raised $65,000 for missions. Well, I just wrote back home, and I said, you Baptist ladies should be ashamed. You're just letting them show you up. So I decided that in September of 1887, I was going to write to Miss Annie Armstrong. And I know you're familiar with Miss Annie Armstrong, too, Reverend. You know, Mr. Woolsey was Baptist. And so I'd been thinking, and I said, Miss Armstrong, why not have a special offering the week before Christmas when friends and family are together? They exchange gifts in memory of the gift that was laid on the altar of the world for the redemption of the human race. I said, that's a wonderful time. That would be the perfect time to have an offering. So the next year, in 1888, was the first time that Southern Baptist had organized a special offering for missions. And it was $3,315.26 that they raised. You say, well, that doesn't sound like much, but it was enough to send 3 women to China. Thanks to Miss Armstrong's organizational skills. She was good, and I enjoyed talking to her. In 1888, a new mission station was set up in the interior around the town of Pingtu. That was 120 miles from Tung Chau, where I lived. But I went there to live. I was going to carry on this work. And I had to rent a house. But the women out there were eagerly searching for divine truth. They wanted to hear it. They wanted to talk. They accepted me into their homes. And I just happened to be the only missionary, the lone missionary there. And nobody else spoke English. No one spoke English. I didn't hear English spoken. I had to talk to the Lord because he could understand, you know. And I just pray that no missionary will ever be as lonely as I. And I don't know if you know this, but war is always a threat in China. During the Boxer Rebellion in 1901, it started in 1900 and through 1901, all the foreigners had to leave. The Chinese Christians were persecuted. It was just a civil war is what it was. It was a civil war, and all the time this was going on, which is a good year. The word was death to all believe, everyone who believes in the foreign devil's God. Of course, the foreign devil was us. And so I went to Japan, and many went to Japan. Some took furlough, but I taught in Japan until the uprising was put down. And we got to go back home, back to China, about 9 months later. And you know, they couldn't kill Christianity in China. No, the growth was phenomenal. For years, I had sought a way to relate to the children. And I love children. I had lots of nephews, not many nieces, lots of nephews. And I wanted to talk to the children, but of course they shunned me, and I couldn't, you just couldn't get close to them. Then I remembered the tea cakes that we used to make at home. And what child doesn't like a cookie? So I made the tea cakes, and they smelled them because it went out over the whole neighborhood through the windows. And so I tried to give the children a cookie. They either wouldn't take it, or they'd take it and go home, and the parents would say, I wouldn't eat that. If you do it, probably you'll be poisoned. And so, well, one day, a little boy took a cookie. He took a bite. And he just ate it up. And they were watching him. All the children were watching. He didn't die. He didn't die, so they started taking my cookies. And now they knew. They knew I loved them. And the Chinese no longer call me devil old woman. Now I'm the heavenly book visitor. That's much better, isn't it? And I finally had won their trust. One of my passions since I've been here has been to stop the despicable custom of binding the little girl's feet. It bothers me so much. Their little feet were wrapped tightly until the bones were crushed. And then sometimes it would cause an infection and even loss of life. Not always, but what was the use of that is what I couldn't figure out. And I would not have little girls in my school who had bound feet. Once a grandmother said to me, who would marry a girl with big feet? Well, I'm happy to tell you that foot binding is no longer a fashion. No longer a fashion in China. Now, it still happens, but it's going out. I just really have dreamed about this, that one day these little Chinese girls and the women can stand and walk around like we do, like other women. And because they just totter around on little clubs. And that was very sad to me. I'm sure you've never heard this before, Reverend Woolsey, but I have to end my letter this way. Times are getting very hard now. I don't know about in the United States, but in China, times are hard. A famine has started. It's not been going on too long, but the Foreign Mission Board is broke, deeply, deeply in debt now. And I had a visitor just a few days ago, a Chinese evangelist named Pastor Lee, and he stopped by to see me, and he reported that many of the members in his church are living on leaves and sweet potato vines and roots. The famine is getting worse, and it just breaks my heart that missionaries are doing the very best they can in relief work, and it's still millions of people are suffering. Now, Reverend Woolsey, do you see why I wrote this letter? Why I wanted to send you this letter? Hoping that you and your people will remember that there are missionaries out there that need you, and that there are people out there who need more missionaries. The harvest is very great. The laborers, oh, so few. Sincerely, Lottie Moon. And I'm going to get this letter in the mail. I want to get this mailed today. Thank you, sir.
Well, the war, yeah, thank you. The war followed by the famine. The famine was devastating. It resulted in a lot of loss of life, and Lottie's health grew worse and worse. She got down to 50 pounds. She was so sick that she had to be told, Lottie, you have to leave, you can't stay. She put up a strong fight, but eventually had to give in, and she had to go home. En route to the U.S., she died on board a ship on December 24th, Christmas Eve in Kobe, Japan. Her legacy lives on. She is by no means the only missionary, but she's certainly one that is well known, and we remember her today. She mentioned her letters, and she did send a lot of letters home. I'll show you a part of one of her letters that she wrote. She was a feisty woman, as I said, and as you may have picked up. But she was pleading with churches, this lady called Lottie. And she wrote a letter back home indicating part of her desire. How many there are among our women, alas, who imagine that because Jesus paid it all, they need pay nothing, forgetting that the prime object of their salvation was that they should follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ in bringing back a lost world to God. And so aid in bringing the answer to the petition of our Lord taught his disciples, thy kingdom come. So I want us just think in terms again of that memory verse in these closing moments, the part about he rewards those who seek him. I want to ask you to just personalize a couple of questions here. So I'm going to ask these questions. They're not just for me. I'm asking them, but I want you to ask them of yourself. Personalize these questions. So what do you seek? The Bible says that he rewards those who seek him. What are you seeking? What is really a priority in your life now? What is important? What does your view of money and possessions say you're seeking? What does how you view money and possessions, what does that say you seek? What do your priorities say you seek? What do your giving practices say that you are seeking or that you value? To that end, I want to remind you of the mission offering coming up December the 5th that we'll receive on our In-Gathering Sunday. As you can see, a lot of folks, nearly close to $30,000 has already been given throughout the year. We've got a goal of $70,000 on our mission offering. I want to encourage you to be praying. We can't all give the same gift, but we can all make the same sacrifice. The gifts will look different. The sacrifice should look the same for all of us. So December 5th, In-Gathering Sunday. Please come prepared on that Sunday to give your offering. Make your check to Woolsey Baptist Church. On the memo line, put mission offering. And we will make sure that that is distributed accordingly. Maybe like a college student, you're a skeptic. You are the student that Lottie was. Maybe you're like her in her college days. You're skeptical about Christianity. You just look at it and say, I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. I wonder if someone listening this morning, you're just not sure. And maybe you're not a believer in Jesus right now. I want to tell you the good news of the gospel. The good news that we proclaim is that Jesus is the Son of God who lived the perfect life we did not live, could not live. He came to earth in the form of man. He lived a sinless life. He went to the cross. He shed his blood. He was buried. On the third day, God raised him from death to life. And if you will turn from a self-governed, self-directed life and put trust and faith in Jesus, if you'll believe only on him, he will save you. And you can become a Christian today. You may be a skeptic in one moment, and the next you can be a believer in Jesus. So we invite you. I'd love to have conversation with any that is ready to make that decision. You may think you're in control, and you're not. You really are not in control. Lottie thought she was. Maybe, like Lottie's sister, there are some here that are burned out, or you're close to being burned out. You're kind of trying to burn the candle on both ends. You're going and going and going, and you're not taking care of yourself. You're getting to a dangerous place emotionally. And so I hope you'll hear the call of Jesus to come unto him. And the one whose burden is light and yoke is easy. And rest in him. Trust in him. Look to him. I hope we will be moved to pray more than just those GBM prayers. God bless the missionaries. I hope we'll pray more diligently for those serving around the globe. Instead of God bless all the missionaries, realize that men and women are serving in very hard places and they need our prayers. They need us to pray for them in those lonely hours, those hard times, those days where their seasons feel like there's so little fruit. Maybe, like Lottie, some need to make decisions about relationships. I wouldn't just apply this to young people. I'd apply it to all of us, but Lottie was in a dating relationship that, as far as we know, there was nothing wrong with it. She just knew they were going in different directions. And so how can I say it, young people? As you move through life and as you get older, it is so critical as you think about dating relationships that girl or that man is pursuing the Lord, because if he isn't or she isn't, you're headed for a train wreck. So how can I say it any clearer? You want to be pursuing Christ, and you want to date people that are pursuing Christ and that pursue the same goals that you have. Maybe God's calling some to serve as a missionary. God is still calling, and I hope he calls some out of our church. I'm grateful for those that have gone, but we need to pray for others, for God to raise up and send people. As someone said, give up your small ambitions and pursue him. So perhaps God is calling some to the mission field. I'd love to have conversation with you about that. Maybe God is calling some young men or middle-aged men or older men into the pastorate to help shape a church to have a missional focus. Let me just say in closing that the country where Lottie served is in a region of the world where there are 16 other countries that make up some 2.3 billion people. 2.3 out of Earth's nearly 7.7 billion, 2.3 billion people live in this region of the world where Lottie served. And 16 outside of China, 16 other countries where about 30% of the world's population lives, but only about 4% are evangelicals or Christians. So in this block of the world, every day, almost 44,000 people die, go out into eternity without ever having heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that makes our praying important. It makes our giving important. It reminds us of the importance of what Jesus said, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. May we pray together. Just want to ask that we bow our heads together and close our eyes, and I want you just to ponder what you've heard and reflect on this just for a moment. I'm really extending an invitation now for us to respond. An invitation right there where you're seated to respond to the Lord, to say, God, are you calling me to missions? Maybe God's been tugging at someone's heart about this call. Maybe He's tugging at a young man's heart about pastoral ministry or serving in some other way. Perhaps He's calling us to a greater burden for prayer for the fields that are white unto harvest. Maybe there are relationship issues that are calling for decisions that you need to make. Maybe that are hindering you from pursuing the purposes of God for your life. For the cause of the kingdom, for the cause of the gospel going to the ends of the nations, to the nations, to the ends of the earth, let us make ourselves available. So just in this moment of quiet and reflection, silently, would you make whatever spiritual decision you need to be making now? Father, I thank you that you're still calling, and even in this room, I pray that you will confirm a call that you've been giving, maybe for some since childhood, that call to the mission field. I pray that even today would be further confirmation of that call. I pray that you'll call men to the gospel ministry as pastors, as preachers. I pray that you will raise up other men in this congregation as lay pastors, elders who serve in this church. Father, I pray that you will help us to embrace with all that we are the faith that Lottie Moon embraced you with and trusted you with, and that we too would come to see that you really and truly do reward those who seek you. So would you help us, God, to live with newer, revised priorities and goals and ambitions? Would you help us, God, to live with a greater urgency, whatever we do, if we work in whatever field or whatever arena, would you help us to make the gospel known? Help us to have opportunities even this week. God, remind us that mission work is not limited to lands across the ocean, but there are missional opportunities all around us. And may we be faithful for the cause of the gospel to make your name known. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Let's all stand. We're going to sing a hymn together, and I'm going to come back in a moment and share just a few words of closing announcements before we are sent out into our mission field.